Hello, viewers. I'm Swasti Rao, and I introduced you to the Print World View, a brand new weekly show delving into the pressing global issues of our times. For the flagship episode, we'll take a deep dive into the ongoing crisis in Syria. As of March 2024, the conflict has claimed approximately 600,000 lives, with over 6 million refugees fleeing the country. Syria remains a perilous puzzle, marked by dramatic collapse of the Assad regime and an equally dramatic takeover by the Sunni Salafi group, the HTS. The situation highlights a complex web of global power dynamics between the US and Russia, as well as regional rivalries involving a weakened Iran and its proxies, a resurgent Turkey, an empowered Israel, and more actors like Saudi Arabia and the UAE who basically wish for stability in the region. Syria stands at yet another example of perpetual wars that never seem to reach a resolution. Moreover, the Syrian crisis underscores how interconnected global security dynamics are, demonstrating that events in Syria could have implications for the security concerns in India and its neighborhood. Without further delay, let's begin the discussion with our stellar panel of experts. I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Daniel Carmon. He was Israel's ambassador to India from 2014 to 2018. And he actually came to India just 1 month after Prime Minister Modi took on power. So he knows India very, very well. And we welcome Ambassador Carmon. Then we have with us, Kabir Taneja. I think Kabir needs no introduction, especially in the Indian circles. He's a deputy director and also a fellow with ORF, and he's a specialist of the West Asian region. Only yesterday, he published, I would say, a very telling, account of the HTS and its rise. And Kabir, I welcome you to the discussion and looking forward to your insights. Then we have with us Lev Aran. Lev Aran is the former coordinator of Israel-India Parliamentary Friendship League. He's also a freelance journalist and a columnist. And in fact, if you were to Google him, you would find his columns for the print as well. Finally, we have our in-house expert, Snehesh. Snehesh is the deputy editor who looks after defense. I'm sure you see him speak so much on defense matters and also foreign affairs. And Snehesh is going to be sort of steering this discussion with me. And Snehesh, I also look forward to having some inputs from you as far as the defense, scenario is concerned. Especially about how Russia's weakening in the region is impacting India, because Russia is such an important actor for India. So the situation we have today is where the HTS, Golani has been trying to secularize himself, but we all know that he has had links both with the ISIS and Al Qaeda. Then we have Turkey, of course, and Turkey, although has been supporting the rebels, but then Turkey would also be very wary of the Kurds out there, which are supported by the US. As for Russia and Iran, one knows that Russia has been weakened also and preoccupied because of its, war in Ukraine, and Iran and Hezbollah have been weakened because of Israeli offensives. But despite that, I want to first come to Ambassador Carmon with a very specific question. And that question is that, Ambassador, you know India very well, and one of the widely held opinions in India is that whatever has happened in Syria in the last 1 week is basically masterminded by the CIA and Mossad. How far do you think these kind of opinions truly reflect the reality on the ground? And what really is Israel worried about? We know that Israel is definitely worried about how the weapons were coming from Iran, and Hezbollah, etc. But what else is Israel worried about, especially after what has happened in Syria?
Well, I hope I can agree with you that I know India pretty well, and I know to how should I say, identify the serious commentators and those who are less serious. And it doesn't belong to India at all alone. We have it in every country, and those stories go with the flow. But let's be serious for a second, because it's a very serious and a very dramatic development, a practical change in the Middle East that we still have to assess before we understand what really, really happened. I mean, the facts on the ground are there. The challenges are huge. The story is huge. And the opportunity is there also. And I think it will take time before we understand exactly what happened. In the meantime, the international community, and since I speak not on behalf of the Israeli government, but as an Israeli, a concerned citizen, I cannot disconnect what happened over a few days ago in Syria from the bigger picture of a war that is being going on since October 7th, 2023, with 7 fronts that Israel has been confronted with. One of them, as you mentioned, is our front in the north, and Syria, together with Hezbollah and Iran, under the supervision and the leadership of Iran, has been leading what we call the axis of evil. And the axis of evil has been really, really weakened by this revolution, but we can elaborate a little later. But to your question, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the developments. Let's look at the challenges and to the opportunity that might emerge.
All right. So I'm going to come back to you with respect to what kind of opportunities and challenges might emerge. As far as I've been following this entire thing, I think from Israel's perspective, we've also seen that Israeli Air Force has carried out about 250 airstrikes.
Well, they're
You know,
defanging
yeah,
the
the
Syrians.
Syrians, and frankly, their concern is, and I was reading a lot of commentary that was coming out from there, and with that, of course, I'm going to go to Kabir, for that. But the thing is that Israel seems to be very mindful of all that equipment falling into the hands of quote unquote elements that could be very, very destabilizing to Israel again. And that is why we've been seeing this about 250 or 200 airstrikes that, Israeli Air Force has carried out on military targets. So, Kabir, coming to you, and you have obviously been writing on it as well, and you've been following it as well, very closely. We got their support on Kashmir, etc. But what really does the rise of the Sunni Salafi, ideology in Syria would mean for India? That's the first one, and I think a related one to that, because I'm sure you're going to expand on that later as well. Is that how worried should we be? Because one of the arguments is that, okay, the rise in the jihadi mindset is ultimately going to be a security concern for India. But looking at the geographical distance, I mean, do you really think that this is something which is going to spill over in South Asia and also across our borders?
Thanks. Look, geography as an impediment when it comes to, let's say, fighters moving or jihadists moving is an
Yeah.
impediment if countries that belong to that geography want it to be an impediment.
Hmm.
Syria has been home to a full gambit of militant fighters for a long period of time. It's not new.
Hmm.
A lot of the rebels that we see today, whether it's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or whether it's it's on the other side, sort of the quote unquote more palatable ones in the Syrian Democratic Forces or the National Syrian Army, which is supported by the Turks.
Yeah.
The composition of all these sort of entities is very, very lucid.
Hmm.
So for example, there were reports then when the Syrian army did not show up basically anywhere before Assad left Damascus.
Yeah.
There were reports of that the frontline fighters from the Syrian perspective at that point of time were those that the IRGC hired from Pakistan and Afghanistan, so the Zibayun and the Fateh brigades.
Okay.
And those are fighters that have been in Syria for a long period of time. Qasem Soleimani, I remember, released photos of visiting graves of these fighters.
Hmm.
After there was backlash in Pakistan and Afghanistan that they are being used as fodder.
Right.
Even now, we are still getting, for example, pictures from Syria of rebels where the Uyghur militants are there. So the ETIM,
Yeah.
the Turkestan forces, and so on and so forth. So that, for example, becomes an issue for China, which has been pushing against ETIM and presence of ETIM for from multiple positions.
Right.
So that clearly shows that fighters have traveled
Okay.
from various parts and joined these militias, and geography was not an impediment for whatever reasons. Maybe someone allowed them to go in, or they were just clearly hired. So multiple sort of rings to that. But as far as India is concerned, usually we come to basically one issue of concern, which is Kashmir, and sort of whether there will be sort of any spillover into that part. I don't think so. I think the Syrian theater is actually very, very far away. But having said that, it's a trend that is not conducive to promoting an idea of countering terrorism.
Right.
All said and done, for example, we have seen sort of Afghanistan play out for us in a negative way on multiple occasions. There are weapons that are coming into Kashmir that have been
Yes.
basically moved out of Afghanistan, and they've been openly being sold in Pakistan and are arming sort of local militias in Kashmir. So Afghanistan, of course, was a proximity thing for India, but Syria
Right.
is not going to be that. But having said that, it's important to remember that in this time and age of how militias work and how well funded they are and how well advised they are and how well put together they are, getting resources, including human resources, does not seem to be a huge concern in any shape or form. So we have to just keep that in mind.
Right. I think you made a fair point where you actually sort of explained to everybody that here geography is not really an impediment and it's more got to do with ideology, and which is, of course, a concern. And we have to see and we have to keep our eyes and ears open. And also, I think we have to keep our preparedness pretty on point in order to sort of tackle this particular situation, whichever way it unfolds. And of course, there's a lot which is not really known right now. With that, let me come to Lev. How do you sort of see the vested interests? So the US administration, both Biden and Trump, have gone on record saying that this is not our mess and we don't want to get involved. But yet there are 900 US troops, special forces, if I'm not wrong, special forces stationed there that are actually supporting the SDF, basically the Kurds. And then you have a Turkey out there, and the Turkey has had this resurgence. What would that imply from Israeli perspective? Also, because the Indian theater, so sort of try to bring that in as well.
Okay, so let's start with the fact that Israel never had a plan to boot out Assad.
Okay.
We had a Syrian policy. Unlike Trump, Israel had a Syrian policy. Our policy was to beat Hamas and to beat Hezbollah and to humiliate Iran, and then to go to Assad and tell him, don't be in Iran's chamcha. Be independent state. Don't let the ammunition go from Iran to Lebanon via your territory. But he was a chamcha and he lost the war, and now he is nobody. And I guess right now, as far as Israel is concerned, we need better borders with Syria. We need to understand if the new regime respects the borders that we had with Assad. And you see that we moved on in few fronts in the eastern part of Israel. So this is one thing. And I think the second thing is the fate of the Kurdish minority in Syria, which is also an Israeli concern. Now, as far as the US is concerned, I don't think Trump had any Syria policy. I think he was totally surprised. Also, Tulsi, who met Assad a few times. No, I'm not sure a few times, but who met Assad and even refuted that he's like such a terrible dictator. So I don't think he had a Syria policy. But all in all, if we can judge Trump according to his first tenure, I think that Trump really believes in a moderate Sunni coalition in the Middle East. And I think that maybe the new regime in Syria will try to convince Trump that they can be part of this coalition, part of this solidarity. I don't think they will go for like a big peace agreement with Israel, but at least they will try to prove America that they are not anti-Americans. And Al-Julani, as a matter of fact, for over half a decade, he tries to prove everybody that he's not ISIS and he's not Al-Qaeda. Yes. So I guess this will be the American policy. And the Russians, they lost a lot of clout. I don't think anybody can argue about it. And I think they have two options. One option is to understand that there is a new regime, and they will have to work with the new president. The other one is try to dismember Syria and at least to have the Alawi part as some kind of autonomy inside Syria. If we go to our history books, practically for, let's say, 25 years, officially up to 36, but practically up to 1944, there was an Alawi state in Syria, and they were not part of big Syria. And out of there, the Alawi elite has emerged, Hafez al-Assad and then his son. So Russians have only two options. I don't see a third option for the Russians.
But coming to Snehesh now and getting the defense perspective, Snehesh, we all know that Russia, from Russia's perspective, and I discussed Russia first and we discuss Iran later. Russia is a very important partner to India. Also, because so much of our hardware, especially defense hardware, is still coming from Russia. We have long traditions of the Soviet era ties, etc. And when it comes to, there have been so many works on why Syria has been so important to Russia. And Syria is important to Russia because, of course, Russia, after 2015, when it intervened, it had one air base in Khmeimim, and then it has a naval base in Tartus. And that is the region from where Russia also operates as influence in the wider Central African region, and all the Wagner fighters, that they are into diamond mining, they are into, all kinds of things. There's also a lot of unregulated weapons markets, the black market out there. So there is a whole lot of things out there. With the redeployment of their naval assets from Tartus, back to perhaps Kaliningrad, because they obviously cannot come to Black Sea. The Montreux Convention is preventing that from happening. Now, I think everybody here agrees that this is a huge dent to Russia's reputation. In fact, I know the famous commentator Ian Bremmer, he actually went on record when this entire disturbance was starting, and he said that, listen, Russia will not let Assad fall. He's too important an ally for Russia to not support. But a few days later, we know that the situation has worked out in a different manner. What do you think will happen to Russia's military presence, strategic presence, because Russia was obviously trying to counter, the US out there? And what do you think will happen by and large to its influence in the region and in the world? And how should India look at it? I mean, yeah.
See, on the face of it, definitely this is a setback for Russia.
Yeah.
This is actually a win for Turkey. And India has no deep friendship with Turkey, at least in the current regime that is there. But as I said, on the face of it, this looks like a setback. But the way that the Assad government really fell, way that the Syrian army completely defenseless, they pulled out, they were missing in action. And then Assad suddenly appears himself, appears in Russia. So I think the last word on Syria is yet to be said.
Yeah.
So one will really have to see because there's a whole lot talk of, the Doha talks that took place, and there's a whole lot of things which are in motion right now, and we're still not getting the entire picture yet. But as I said, on the face of it, it's a setback to Russia. Besides that, I think one of the main concerns for India would be this regime change that has happened, and India has gone ahead and the MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, has made it very particular that Syria's sovereignty has to be respected, which is an indirect message to many other multiple players. And Syrian problem is not just of Syria and its people, as Kabir brought out. There were multiple factions that were in play. Israel was in play, Turkey was in play, Russia was in play,
Iran,
Hezbollah, the US. So multiple factors in play. And interesting is that you have this whole Pentagon and the CIA fighting it out, right? Even Elon Musk has tweeted on it. They had opposite interest in Syria itself within the same administration. So I think India's big worry, as Kabir mentioned, is the fact that while of course Russia is a setback for Russia, but India would not be too concerned about that. India's concern would be with its relationship with Syria in 2023. You had the Indian Minister of State for External Affairs visiting Syria. Syria has always supported India's stand on Kashmir.
Yeah.
Interestingly, way back in 2011, and India has not gone back on its stand, is India supported Syria's stand on the Golan Heights, which Israel would have an issue with, but India supported Syria on that. India did not support any of the UN sanctions on Syria. It actually, during COVID crisis, it actually asked the UN and the other countries to soften the sanctions against
India has also
Syria.
sent humanitarian aid,
Yeah,
to
humanitarian
Syria.
aid to
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
and there's investments that India has done. You know what? Initially, Syria was out in the cold by the Arab League, but then it has rejoined the Arab League because other countries also are aware that this fanatic rebel group which is coming in, and
Yeah.
he might want to be, some people might want to call him secular. And I think, I saw my editor-in-chief Sheikh Gupta's tweet,
Yeah.
in which he mentioned that these rebels, are at best a Taliban and at worst the ISIS. So that's where it is.
Yeah. So, in fact, that is a question that I would like to now take to Ambassador Carmon, because what do you make of the other powers in the region? I mean, what is about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all these countries? I mean, what is their fears? What is their anxiety? Where do they stand? I know that a simple answer would be wait and watch, that we are all doing and monitoring the situation. But keeping in mind how the global and the global politics evolving generally, because we are living in an era of perpetual war anyway, but also in the West Asian or the Middle Eastern region, how does that impact the regional, so to say, power play?
If I can go for a second to the previous question, because it is related, we should wait to see how things work out within Syria. But on the Russian behavior and on the Iranian behavior, I think it's striking to see how easily they sort of left the scene, more or less. And if I were a Syrian, I would think and not only a Syrian, by the way, I would think more than once about the fact that Russia and Iran let things happen. They could have probably decided not to, but they could have confronted this. On the larger picture that you asked about, I think there are various levels of thinking about it. One is the real immediate one, something that concerns Israel. I mean, Israel is very much concerned as an immediate neighbor to Syria, and we have a saying in Israel: the Syrians are on the border, and it's a very serious. Concern, because when we had a Syrian army, notwithstanding the fact that it was the army of Assad, we had someone we could talk to. There is a disengagement agreement from 1974 that was respected meticulously by both sides. One of the quietest borders were the borders on the Golan, with the disengagement, with the relatively effective UN force, etc. Syria for Israel is the conduit territory through which Iran sent armament, munitions, and capabilities to Hezbollah. But it is also a place where development of very dangerous capabilities was done. So this is an immediate concern, and everything that Israel is doing nowadays has to do with this, and I'm sure the international community understands that and even supports that, because I heard some reactions around the world, and they're very positive to what Israel is doing under the circumstances. The second level, I would say, if we said before that the axis of evil was weakened and was weakened big time, it's not over. It's still there, and it will take time, if at all, to disappear, and it won't disappear. The axis of evil that we all suffer from. I'm very afraid, and this is something that maybe going to the long run, I'm very afraid and concerned, rather concerned by the surge of a new axis, so that instead of the Shiite axis of evil, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, our complicated region will see the emergence of Muslim Brotherhood axis of evil led by Turkey and Iran. Turkey has various interests, not only geographical and the hundreds of thousands of refugees that flood Turkey and other interests. Turkey, I believe, does not want the destruction of the state of Israel, but if it has a coalition and Qatar could be their partner to the coalition, I would be very concerned about the possibility. And if I were if I could give an advice to the international community, is to look very carefully about what Turkey and Qatar might be doing in the future. As to the rest of the region, I mean, everyone is very much concerned, of course, but I think they won't go into that crisis. They have their own interests, they have their own policies. They're much more related to economics and world commerce, and we have so many programs, some in which Israel is also involved. I would not be very, very much concerned about that. One country I would depict as a country of much concern and again, a concern for the international community, this is Jordan. Jordan could be at risk from militias, from fundamentalists, and I would look very much into it. And of course, Israel has an interest in a strong and stable Jordan Hashemite kingdom.
Right. Oh, I'm very glad you brought even more actors, and it actually sort of highlights how complex the real situation on the ground is. I have to come to Kabir. Kabir, I also want you to delve a little bit on what would it mean for Iran. Do you think that by this getting pushed to the corner, not first by the US, and now with Trump back in the White House, and now with Israel doing what Israel did to weaken Iran, and finally what has happened in Syria, do you think Iran is at a greater risk, or there's a greater chance for Iran to now double down on its nuclear program? Because, what does Iran do now?
And Kabir, just to add to a question also, Iran had its own military personnel in Syria. Now, what I'm reading around is that, before this whole attack happened, because Iran realized that Assad is no longer going to fight, they had struck a deal with the rebels and pulled out their troops safely also. So is there something happening between them, back channel talks, and as the ambassador said, a new axis could emerge?
Yeah, so look, I think Iran is a very interesting factor here because, for a long period of time, Assad's existence depended on what Iran decided to do with him. And over the past, we mentioned very briefly earlier that Assad was also opening up to the Arab League again and so on and so forth. That is largely because for two reasons. Assad didn't want to be a client state for too long for the Iranians as well. And his future, he didn't want his future to depend on either on what Tehran wants. And the Arabs also saw a very good time to try and wean him off that addiction of Iranian support. But having said that, some very interesting statements were made overnight by the Iranians themselves. The Iranians have said that, look, we provided Assad with every kind of intelligence that was imaginable, that there is mobilization by these rebels towards Damascus and towards other Assad strongholds, and there was no movement on those intelligence inputs. And if it is true that the Iranians actually cut a deal with the rebels to get their people out, it makes sense, because if they were not getting any responses from the Assad government itself, then they had to sort of protect their own things as well. Jolani has made no bones about being quite unhappy about both Russia and Iran being inside Syria. So I think there was that sort of space for Jolani and Iran to, if that evacuation of personnel happened, for that to take place in a more systemic manner. But finally, let's just very quickly look. We have to also remember that Iran, in the initial stages of the civil war, by going back to 2012, 2013, pulled in Hezbollah into Syria, and Hezbollah was not that keen to commit personnel, to commit resources into Syria to prop up Assad, because they wanted that kind of capacities to stay in Lebanon. And even this time, there were sort of floating reports that Iran wants Hezbollah fighters to come into Syria and sort of create that soft cushion for Assad to fight on. But I think that did not materialize. Maybe there was a pushback from Hezbollah against Iran as well, saying that, look, we are down on for the count right now. We need the kind of whatever resources we have for our political and military aims in Lebanon. So Iran has, Iran, they have made no bones about that. This is a big blow to them inside Syria, and this is a big blow to axis of resistance, as they call it. And the fact that they have said this in a fairly public manner is very interesting, goes back to domestic politics in Iran as well. I think it's a messaging to IRGC and the Ayatollah as well that, look, these losses have had consequences, and we have to manage sort of our domestic polity along with our regional policies on these matters. We have to remember that the Iranian leadership, the civil leadership of Pezeshkian and Agharchi and so on and so forth, don't really have much say on regional policy designs when it comes to security and foreign policy. So the fact that they are raising this publicly is also to pressure, I think, internally to make sure that it does not escalate beyond the point.
Yeah, I think the foreign minister recently made a very candid statement about how it's impacted Iran.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. So now, as we come to the conclusion of this very wonderful discussion and very fruitful discussion, that now I think it's time to ask our experts for their recommendations, because I think one key aspect of this discussion is how do we take it forward? What kind of policy recommendations would these experts give us, both to the Indian government as well as to the Indian scholarly community, say the think tank community, the students who want to work? And for that, let me first go to Kabir. And Kabir has already written a piece that I referred to earlier. So Kabir, what do you think are your recommendations for how do we take this conversation forward? What are the key things that we need to take, to keep looking at? And then finally, what about India's national interest? How do we pursue that?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's I think it's the recommendation pass can be when sort of said out loud in a very simple manner, that learn from Afghanistan. Learn from what has happened in Afghanistan, because there is euphoria right now in Syria and around Syria about Assad sort of being pushed out of power, which is understandable. We've seen some horrific images coming out of prisons being emptied out of people that have been there for decades, apparently. So that is understandable. But Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and people like Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, they're not rational actors. Let's not try to make them into rational actors. We've seen that not really play out very well in Kabul over the past almost 5 years now. It's been half a decade. And we are already looking at conversations coming out of Syria about interim governments and so on and so forth, that they will just hold fort for some time till a formal sort of formalization of talks between various parties are concluded on what kind of polity Syria will look at. That type of interim government in Afghanistan has been there for 5 years. There are no talks taking place. They have shunted out the oppositions, and they are in no mood to talk. Now, if someone like Jolani, I would be very, very surprised if he comes out and says that, yes, we will look for an inclusive political structure in Damascus. Let's be honest about it. It's been a military takeover. It's not really a political takeover. It's just that the Syrian army didn't fight back. That's the only sort of anomaly here. So let's be very, very careful on moving forward when we are discussing Syria. I think it's too early right now to also sort of ascertain what kind of really recommendations we can give. But I think base starting point should be that Jolani is not a rational actor. He has a background in both Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. If just because he's wearing a nice suit or a nice shirt now and calling himself with his real name doesn't make him a palatable force to reckon with. So let's be very, very careful. And as far as India is concerned, look, India has had good relationship with Syria and its people for a long period of time, going back to 1957 when Jawaharlal Nehru visited. There are some accounts from back then that said, almost 15,000 people came out in the streets to welcome him. And that was largely from an amalgamation of anti-colonial movements that had taken place at that point of time. So there was a lot of commonalities between a lot of Arab countries and India. So, but having said that, even from an India and Assad point of view, Assad was as sort of unpalatable he was within Syria. From a bilateral perspective, Syria was one of the few countries, for example, that supported India's position in Kashmir. Not extremely overtly, but they did, right? So they did not, even I think till about a year and a half ago, the Syrian ambassador in Delhi reiterated that the Kashmir issue should be solved by India as its own issue. There should be no external intervention into that. So that was a very rare voice for India to have from that part of the world for a long period of time. So when it comes to when we're talking about Syria and India, I think there were mostly national interests at play here. From an Indian perspective, at least. India kept its embassy open throughout the civil war, barring, I think, 2-3 months in 2015 when Damascus was really being hit hard. And I don't see that changing per se to whoever comes into play for the time being, at least, unless, there is the complete drastic takeover of a Kabul kind. But even in Kabul, we have a technical office, quote unquote, right now. So I don't see that sort of changing beyond a certain level.
Now, coming to where do you think is India's interest in all this? I mean, of course, as you know, that India has always maintained a policy of multi-alignment. In West Asia, India has had close ties, I mean, especially in the recent years, India has been developing very close ties, especially in the defense sector with Israel. But at the same time, Iran has remained an important vector of India's West Asian outreach. India has tried to always sort of have that multi-alignment. How do you see that getting impacted, if at all? And how do you see this getting unfolded from an Indian perspective? And of course, you're free to bring in whatever you wish to, but I would also like you to include in your remarks certain recommendations that you think would make sense not only for the Indian government, but also for the larger Indian strategic community with respect to certain publications to watch out for, certain spokesperson to watch out for. And of course, like I said, for the government as well. So yes, Lev, back to you.
I think if we look for some kind of a continuum from foreign policy of Nehru to Modi, is that India never wanted to be a Japan. India never wanted to bank on America only. India always wanted to have independent foreign policy. And in this sense, we saw that even under severe pressure from the Americans during the Ukrainian-Russian war, India was smart enough not to believe the Americans too much. But right now, we have a new situation. Biden is not there in January. We have Trump. I don't think Trump will be very much concerned about human rights in Kashmir and so on. Okay, so we have a new America. And we see that Russians were not able to protect their proxies. So I think India has a chance now to check again the balance between America and Russia. And Syria is some kind of an AC test to the real soft power and also hard power of Russia. So it is too early to judge because Al-Jolani now, he is like very moderate and he doesn't attack Alawis or Christians and so on. He looks like a soft, let's say a soft Sunni military guy, but maybe we will discover a new Al-Jolani in 1 month, in 2 months. So we still do not know. But I do believe that India should retest its foreign policy towards America and Russia now that it saw the real, let's say, the real power of Russia and how far Russia can help. because on one hand, India is right. With Russia, if you're a friend, you're a friend. If you're an enemy, you're an enemy. They're less hypocritical than the Americans in a way. But on the other hand, Russians are not that strong. And banking on Russia also could prove to be wrong. Thank you.
Right. Snehesh, do I come to you now for what do you think should be the recommendations?
As far as the government of India is concerned, I think India's stand is going to be very similar to what it was earlier. It's continued engagement with Syria. We are waiting for the new set of, to see who's going to be in power, what kind of a power setup is going to be there. India will continue to, have the humanitarian interest of Syria in mind.
Yeah.
And Syria, historically, traditionally, has been an important ally of India, and especially in this whole Middle East sector, right? But at the same time, what Lev said about Russia, no doubt that Russia is weakened, but I don't think so at any point of time India is banking on Russia, and
Yeah,
neither is India banking on the US. I think India is banking on itself, and that is how it should be. But having said that, these are new realities in place. I think a lot will unravel once Trump comes to power. When he's sworn in as the president, it's going to be not just a new America. I think it's going to be a new world itself, because given the kind of people that Trump is appointing, he's actually giving a thumbs down or thumbs up to the world order that we knew of, right? So there's going to be a lot of change. So one will so to understand what is exactly happening in this region, and to to understand how we proceed, I think we'll have to wait and watch for the Trump 2.0 to unravel. And that is when things will become interesting.
Right. With that, Ambassador, the last word to you. And we'd like to know also from you about, this concern in India that, of course, when it comes to Turkey, I mean, India is not having very pleasant relationship with Turkey. India has been trying to ramp up its Mediterranean strategy, forging new strategic partnerships with a lot of Mediterranean countries to try and balance the axis of Turkey, Pakistan, and the Azerbaijan Armenia war. India has been the topmost defense supplier to Armenia, also with its new strategic partnership with Greece. So one of the concerns, and very soon you would probably have somebody from India visit Greece to actually see what they could do about the ISI activities. So what I'm trying to say is that to counter Turkey's influence has been one of the goals that India is doing. With this development in Syria, which has obviously been a boon, to Turkish influence in the region, how do you see India should go about it?
Well, thank you. First of all, I coincide. I truly agree with my predecessors on what they said. I don't see any fine line of contradictions at all. The story of what has happened in Syria is a huge story. It will have implications on regional implications and global implications. I think we have technically 2 dates now to wait for. One is the holiday season, believe it or not, but the holiday season in the Christian world. The other one is waiting for the inauguration. And after the inauguration, Syria will have enough time to sort of the various factions in Syria and the dynamics of politics there will the dust will settle, hopefully. The dust will settle, and I also hope with no danger to Syria's neighbors from the internal upheaval that they witnessed. I think that we definitely should look at it as in the larger picture. We should let the Syrians work out during those few weeks, get their act together if it's possible. I saw a sketch. I'm not an expert on the issue, but I saw a sketch of the various factions talking about dozens and dozens of factions under 4 coalitions. It's really incredible what is going on there, and it's a big. I think it's a big fault by the various intelligence community that all were surprised by the speed and the magnitude of what happened. But if we go back strategically and politically, I think the international community should have a big role. We are usually criticizing the UN, and I know that in India also the international community sometimes is looked at with a pinch of salt, almost as critical as the Israelis are. But here there is something that has proven to be successful in other countries, which is called peace building. Peace building comes from the internal dynamics of getting internally countries act together. I would rely with a strong support of the various countries concerned and start a peace building process within Syria. And hopefully within, I don't know, it might take a couple of years, maybe more, see not a unified Syrian country, but I would maybe a government that would be effective, a government that would put sovereignty in the territory of Syria and bring back the Syria as a nation. Enough mistakes were made during history by so many on Syria and Lebanon, and this should be corrected now by the same international community that did the mistakes. You did not ask me about India, but I will comment one thing. I think the Indian foreign policy is very well articulated by Dr. Jaishankar in the last couple of years. He says it in a very, very straight way. India and only India will decide on its foreign policy. India and only India will look 360 degrees around itself, will find partners both politically, economically, developmentally, and it is doing so in a very effective, good, and articulate way. And I would leave to the Indian foreign policy and the Indian government the decision what to do. And I'm sure their eyes are very wide open to what is happening in what you call West Asia. And I'm sure it will be continued that way, finding the strategic partners, finding the stability in some countries and the instability in others, and to make the appropriate decisions. I want to stress that the situation in Syria, as complicated as it is on the background of a very, very complicated Middle Eastern situation that we witness day in and day out. And just to let you know that in the news broadcast, the Syrian front is the third item. It's not the first item that is reported. And all of this on the background, and I'd like to stress one particular challenge that we have in Israel versus our enemies, which is the remaining of 100 hostages captive in the hands of Hamas. This is a situation that must be resolved as soon as possible. And the world should know that still those are our people who are dying in the tunnels day in and day out.
I would thank Ambassador Carmon, Kabir, Lev, of course, and Snehesh for adding so much value to today's discussion and really opening up all the layers that we could actually possibly do, and also came to the conclusion there are more questions than answers right now. But very frankly, I think if I just sort of concluded for the viewers, I think the key takeaways are very evident. The first thing is that India must operate in strategic autonomy, and with strategic autonomy should be looked upon as an enabling factor for India. So strategic autonomy is the strategic space that allows India, that enables India to open up its discussion with all the relevant actors, not pitting one against the other. And I think this is one common consensus that everybody sort of came to, is that India must operate in strategic autonomy because India believes in multi-alignment, and this is how India looks at West Asia or the Middle East. The second thing is about this rebalancing which is going on out there with respect to whatever has happened. And I think it is also strategic autonomy, Snehesh, which will enable India to sort of, find its equilibrium within that rebalancing of sorts. And as to the final, picture, obviously we will all have to wait and watch what really are HDS's true colors. How far does Israel keep its promise of, giving back the demilitarized zone, etc. And finally, what would that mean for India's aspirations with IMEC? I mean, a point that Lev raised, because if I can tell you, viewers, there already has been a lot of research going on also in Europe, for example, that how about looking at alternative routes? And one of the alternative routes that they were looking at IMEC was actually going through Syria.
Yeah.
But with this situation, this becomes a very, very complicated deal. So should India wait for the situation in the Middle East to normalize and then pursue IMEC? Or should India set aside the Middle Eastern situation and actually develop more ties with Mediterranean, and then looking at Europe is something that only time can tell. But I guess looking at India's Mediterranean strategy, I think India is already looking at developing the other side of IMEC instead of waiting for that. But thank you so much for a wonderful discussion, and I hope that a good discussion is where we arrive at more questions than answers, so that there is always a follow-up later on. So I hope you liked the first episode of the Print World View. Stay tuned for the second one.